Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Checked Before. This time, Chaos on the Bridge. Yeah, it's a fantastic documentary about behind the scenes of TNG, but hosted by my man, William Shatner. Check it out. Speaking of behind the scenes, last week we got a Patreon exclusive. Last week, Buck Rogers in 25th Century. Lots of fun. Go in deep down in the rabbit hole with us. And it don't take much. It so much doesn't take much that I was using improper English here. It don't take much. Because patreon.com/IBD, and you'll get all of the content. Including this documentary, Chaos on the Bridge, on It's All Been Checked.
Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Checked Before. Your regular hosts are here.
This is Stephen.
Jimmy-Jerome. Leo. He's not Keith. Sorry.
He's not Keith.
Keith, in this branch of the multiverse, is at the Doctor Strange of the Multiverse of Madness.
That's right.
In another branch of the multiverse, he's on this podcast. So if you have the ability to travel between dimensions, if you want to go get America Chavez and open some star-shaped portal, I haven't seen the movie. I'm just...
Me either.
Stuff I know.
I know the Scarlet Witch is there. I know that.
Yes. Then hop on over there and you can see Keith in this episode. But in this reality, no Keith. We're going alone, unfortunately.
This makes it a special episode.
Yeah. We'll just get his thoughts next time, I guess. Chaos on the Bridge, the documentary, that's what we're here to talk about. What are your first impressions?
My first impression in the first 5 minutes is like, I don't know if I'm going to be interested in this. And then I actually was. I found it fascinating. Like a lot of the stuff you've alluded to through through the last 5 seasons of our show and TNG. But I found a lot of it interesting. Like that, I didn't like, and I still don't like the country music that was used. I guess it made sense in terms of the poker game kind of, which I actually ended up liking that, and I actually ended up kind of liking the animation too. And I found it really interesting. And I mean, at the end, I was like, I want to hear some more stories. So yeah, I ended up liking it, even though, like I said, initially I was like, I don't know if this is 59 minutes. I don't know if I'm going to be around for this. But I think Shatner being involved obviously always helps for me.
I mean, he didn't just host it; he wrote and directed this.
Yeah, which I didn't know, and I was impressed. So the guy kept doing newer and newer things. I'm talking about him like he's passed. The guy continues to do newer and newer things. He's still doing stuff.
He's got another documentary out called The Captains, where he examines and interviews each captain in the Star Trek franchise. So we'll probably watch that at some point, but I feel like if we watched it now, it would spoil everything.
Right.
So we won't. Yeah, some of the stuff in this documentary I knew from other books I've read and other sources. I actually just saw this documentary for the first time about 6 months ago. I saw it pop up on the TV, and then I was like, I'm going to check this out. And then I was like, okay, we should all watch it and talk about it. So that's my bad if you didn't like it. But
I didn't look to see how recent it was. Is it like 2 or 3 years old, or did it just come out? I didn't even look it up.
This has been out for a while, 2014.
Okay, so it's okay.
So 8 years.
So
I know 2014 seems like a year ago, but 8 years ago.
Shatner was only 83 then, so he was a young pup.
Young pup. Yeah. So I do think it was a little bit dramatic and a little bit overblown, but I appreciated getting to hear from the people that made it. I kind of appreciated that it wasn't so much the cast, although I did like the cast contributions, but to actually get DC Fontana and David Gerald and get them, that's fascinating to me. I mean, Bob Jessman has passed away, so he wasn't available, but and Maurice Hurley, Maurice Hurley is a character. So I mean, I feel like he was the star of this, if anybody was.
Yeah, he was fascinating. Like he seemed like an ill fit, but he also seems similar to Roddenberry in the sense felt like a guy who's like been around and knows how to do stuff, or been around and knows how to make shows, even though his run wasn't necessarily the best part of the run. But
I do feel like he did. I mean, he made some mistakes like forcing out Gates McFadden. At least that's the way it was being told. Mm-hmm. I also feel like season 2 had started to improve upon season 1. And yes, it got even better when they brought in all the season 3 guys, which they don't get to till the end of the documentary, and they don't really go much beyond season 3. But the season 2 was important. I feel like somebody had to go in there and knock out the original series group. I'm sorry.
That's true.
I'm sorry, but season 1 wasn't great.
Yeah.
And they were repeating mistakes and not doing what it should do. And so, like him or hate him, and I feel like either is justified or a combination of the two, because I thought we're in the middle. But he, for better or for worse, he helped Star Trek The Next Generation evolve, and it needed to evolve. So one of my favorite parts about this documentary, though, is when they're giving you two people back to back telling you contradictory things. Because that's so true to life. That's so realistic.
Yeah.
I appreciated that it didn't. Shatner didn't try to tell you one narrative. He was just letting them tell their story.
Yeah. Maurice Hurley, he was a lot of fun in it. And he's a guy, do I have no? No, I have Gene down as the person I have a drink with just because he's Gene Roddenberry. And it sounds like maybe I knew this and forgot that he went into rehab for drug and alcohol abuse. I think you're right, though. We talked about, and I wonder if David Gerrold and DC Fontana, if their scripts would have been better that year without Gene's meddling and all that stuff. But
I mean, that's another thing. Gene didn't pass away till the beginning of season 4. Mm-hmm. And obviously those other guys took control in season 3, but seeing Gene's last days chronicled in this documentary was interesting too, because I feel like we got some more information there than what I was aware of up until now.
Yeah, and I thought the especially like Ronald D. Moore and I think Brandon Braga were the guys who were who and some of the others too, but they were the
Michael Piller and Ira Stephen Bear. Yeah, the four.
Yeah, who were like, you know what? He obviously, even before his health started failing, he'd lost a step, obviously, and he had this certain humanism vision, which is interesting and feels like a part of Star Trek even still to an extent. But he was really going there. But then they also paid respect to him at the end, which I thought I appreciated. Because and this is the Star Wars part of the podcast. I mean, it's like people badmouth George Lucas now. It's like, you can go ahead and do that all you want and say he kind of lost it with the prequels or whatever, which that's open to debate as well. But the guy created something, a pretty amazing thing that's still going and flourishing. And so if you have problems with it, I get it. And same with Roddenberry, but still that original idea and the original ideas he had were there. And I guess it didn't dawn on me until I knew this in my brain, but I hadn't connected all the pieces where they were like, well, he did Star Trek, and then he had just a bunch of failures.
Failure.
Yeah.
Then they're like, you want to do more Star Trek? Yeah. No, but okay.
Yeah. Like I knew that, but I didn't know that. And it makes sense that, I'm glad he got, and I think some of those folks said it too. I'm glad he was able to reconnect and at least have another run, or at least kind of push the franchise into the future. I mean, I still like it at the end of the Discovery opening where they play the original notes, and they have created by Gene Roddenberry. That's still
all the Star Treks will always end with created by Gene Roddenberry.
And I will still always enjoy that. He's the great bird of the galaxy, despite some of the misgivings we've talked about at length with the original series and this series. Like, well, he screwed this up. Yeah, he shouldn't have done that. But
well, yeah, I mean, your point about Lucas, that occurred to me as well. I feel like Gene's ideas were a lot more original than Lucas's ideas, which is a topic for another podcast. But I do wonder how much Gene's death when it occurred saved the Star Trek franchise from the same trap Star Wars fell into.
True, yeah. I'm someone who actually, I think I like the prequels better than the sequels, but I think for Star Wars to flourish, I mean, I guess Lucas was still involved with, saying that's cool, a lot of the Dave Filoni stuff and everything. And I don't know if he still sends any ideas to Disney or not, or if he's just like, you this is all yours, whatever. But, he's got his money. But
both franchises had a popular but mixed start, then a bad period where the creator tried to enforce his vision, then were taken over by other people. In Star Trek's case, it was taken over by that group I'm talking about, Michael Piller, Ron Moore, Brandon Braga, Ira Stephen Bear, who paid tribute while evolving the show in a good way, in a great way. They really kept that franchise running forever, Rick Berman being the leader in that period. But then both franchises got screwed up by J.J. Abrams' involvement and trying to continue.
I totally agree. Like the series stuff that Dave Filoni's doing, it's kind of hit and miss, but some of it's like great and some of it's like, it's kind of that fantasy sci-fi conversation we have all the time where it's like, I like the sci-fi stuff in Star Wars, and when it gets too fantasy, that's when I'm like, okay, when is this arc of Rebels or Clone Wars going to be over? Because the other stuff I really like a lot. But again, yeah, like you said, that's another podcast. But it isn't interesting that they went the same trajectory. And and Roddenberry's thing was like Wagon Train to the Stars, but that's how he had to sell it. But Lucas is very open about, no, I borrowed from here and here and here and here, and and there's YouTube clips out there that'll show you all the shots the homages he was paying in the prequels and why those are great and everything. But speaking of parallels, the L. Ron Hubbard parallel was one that I had thought about before, and I was like, this. And when they're talking about his war experience and all that, I'm like, he was kind of like L. Ron Hubbard, and then I was like, yeah, he was, except he didn't go as far.
He didn't take himself as seriously.
Yes,
his followers were fanatic, which Gene could have built upon and twisted, but he didn't. So the fanatics tended to I feel like the average Star Trek fan these days is not a fanatic, but enjoys the series, and that's a good thing.
Speaking of fanatics, I forgot that people in '87 or whatever when this started. Maybe we've talked about this before, but I forgot that people were like, "No, I want my Kirk and Spock and all that." Yeah. It's like that seems insane to me now, but at the time, it probably made sense to me. But even then, it was like Shatner was 58 or whatever. You could do that series, but that's a different show, and
they had they were wrapping up. They were doing movies, which were good,
right?
And they were going to do a couple more, but they were getting near the end of their movie tenure. It would been really weird to put them back in at this point.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that would have been a good decision, even though part of me really wants to see it.
Right.
I mean, a lot of the first season used the Star Trek Phase 2 scripts that have been abandoned.
Right.
And Riker and Troy were basically Decker and Ilia.
I think if you went right into it after the motion picture or Wrath of Khan, maybe you can get away with it. I know it's only 5 or 7 years, but I can attest 5 or 7 years at this point is a big deal. Yeah. It is a big deal. So
yeah. Well, and the people that complained about Next Gen not being real Star Trek, I feel like we hear the same thing about Discovery. Even though Discovery is a great show. It's its own show, just like Next Gen was its own show from the original series. But it's good in different ways. I miss some aspects of old Star Trek.
Yeah, speaking of Patrick Stewart, I kind of knew the casting process for him a little bit, but I liked how in-depth they went with that. I never knew Yaphet Kotto was in the running, which I think would have been great, because I always we just watched Alien last week. Colleen had never seen it with Yaphet Kotto. So I thought he would have been a cool choice. But obviously Patrick Stewart worked out. And I've referenced this many times in our conversations, the whole Horatio Hornblower thing. And I thought that was interesting where he's like, yeah, they just kind of handed me these. They're like, yeah, this is what you need to know. It's like, okay.
That a little bit confused me because Kirk was Horatio Hornblower and Picard is such a different captain. So I think that shows you at that point, Gene was still not completely separating from what he made, like, because Troy and Riker are such Decker and Ilia based. I feel like Data is kind of your new Spock. He was still envisioning Picard as the new Kirk. Like, that's not how it ended up happening, but he still made those connections.
It was fascinating that he was like, no, he can't be bald, and then he came all the way around. Kind of.
I can definitely see if Maurice Hurley was trying to hang on to Roddenberry's vision, because even though he didn't come from that sci-fi background, he said, like, you're going to stick with Gene's rules. I don't care, no matter what. Right. And of course, you push out the doctor and replace her with a cranky Southern doctor. Like, of course, Pulaski came in.
Which we talked about, like, oh, yeah, they wanted to go that direction. And obviously, it wasn't a good fit. It wasn't a good fit for anybody. It wasn't a good fit for Diana Muldaur. It wasn't a good fit for them. And
jumping back to the beginning of this, I know you didn't care for the country music and stuff, but I kind of like the setup of labeling the players like, this is the whatever, and this is the whatever. And
I did like that.
And the cartoony introduction.
When the personal assistant mistress or whatever that was came up.
Susan Sackett?
Yeah, I was like, I obviously either never knew that or blocked it out, because I was like, wait a minute, there's another mistress?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. And it seemed like Majel knew, and they were all good with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe they were open marriage type people.
Open thing, yeah.
Maurice Hurley first describes it all as wacky doodle, which cracks me up so much. And he says Gene was a great man with great flaws. And I think that is absolutely correct. A great way to describe it. Yep. Because he did. He had huge flaws. Mm-hmm. And as he stepped back, there was a big struggle for power. That's what this movie was about. That's why it doesn't cover the whole run of the series. It was this vacuum at the beginning of Gene stepping away.
Yeah, and when he was talking about, Gene was starting to slip, but still trying to hold on, and it was like, yeah, I can see and feel that desperation, and and stuff, and you and I have run companies on a much smaller scale, but there's always that kind of machinations is going a little far, but there's going to be conflict. Anytime you have 30 people together working on anything, not everyone's going to love each other, and people are going to want, they're all creative, artistic people. They want to be involved and have their input, some more than others. Some people just don't mix. It's amazing sometimes anything happens out of all that conflict and compromise, but it happens, obviously.
And if you're an Aaron Sorkin or some type that's like a genius, undisputed genius, you can have your way, but anybody else needs to learn to work as a team and not just try to dictate. Right. And I feel like Roddenberry was more of a dictator, but his talent did not justify it. So
yeah. I mean, I think even in the, TOS, he had people like Harlan Ellison and Gene Kuhn and Richard Matheson writing scripts for him, which was smart. That's smart, delegating that. And then
he rewrites them. And that's his own show. He's trying to protect the integrity and keep things consistent. And I get that. Sure. But yeah, the conflicting descriptions of Gene at the beginning, that he was blindly loyal, but also a traitor and stabbed everybody in the back. and he was inspiring, but he was also a bully. I appreciated that. And I have a feeling Gene was all of those things. I really do.
Yeah. And people can be both those things. Yeah. Yes. He was a big person, but he was a big personality, obviously. So.
My biggest complaint about this whole thing is when they're talking about all Gene's failures, they called the motion picture an epic disaster. And I take great offense at that.
I think people are finally starting to come around to our way of thinking, you and me, that, it's pretty good. And it was a disaster on some, if you compare it to other things, but
nobody's going to argue it's better than Wrath of Khan. Okay, some people might argue. Some people will. They'd be wrong, but
they are.
That doesn't mean it wasn't a great movie. I still really like that movie. They're talking about back in 1986 developing the new Trek, and Gene wasn't going to be involved. I thought that was very interesting that the studio is going forward. It makes sense because by then Star Trek had proven itself a moneymaker, could draw film audiences. So you're going to go forward with or without him. But I respect John Pike, and I actually like John Pike in this. He seemed like he can be a bit of a jerk with his bluffing and stuff and being controlling. But I like him, and I liked that he said, we can't do this without Gene. We have to get Gene.
I was the same way. At first, I'm like, who is this jerk? And as it went along, I'm like, this guy plays the game, but he's also a straight shooter. And I really enjoyed him. I
think his interest, I think he's always looking out for the best interest of the show and the franchise.
Yeah.
Even though he sometimes treats people badly to get to it.
Like the thing he did with
Patrick Stewart.
Patrick Stewart was like, ooh, but it worked. And
when Patrick Stewart didn't remember, he had a totally different story. They painted him in a different light. But John Pike and Maurice Hurley were the two I found most compelling about this. I would like to see a whole nother documentary with Ron Moore and Brannon Braga, Michael Piller, and Ira Stephen Byrne get into that era.
I was the same way. I wanted to hear more from those three guys.
Because once Hurley left and the original people left, Rick Berman ran the franchise. Michael Piller was in charge of Next Gen and at first. But Brannon Braga and Ron Moore were like the wonder kids that they brought in that wrote really good stuff and ended up writing the series finale in the first two films.
Yeah.
And then Ron D. Moore went to Deep Space Nine and Brannon Braga went to Voyager, and both of them eventually ran. I know Brannon Braga ran Voyager when Jerry Taylor left, because Jerry Taylor was working on Next Gen in that era as well. Yeah. Came in season 3 or 4. Ron D. Moore worked with Ira Stephen Burr on DS9, and they did that. So Ira Stephen Burr features very heavily in the DS9 documentary. We'll watch when we get to it because he was there for the run of it. So they were all still very involved. And then Rick Berman and Brannon Braga created Star Trek Enterprise. So these were the guys that ran that franchise from here until it ended, that we were just meeting at the end of that documentary.
Okay.
So they did all the spinoffs after that in the films.
I wanted more of them, so it makes sense.
Yeah, someday.
I thought early on they kind of got into the negotiations of Gene coming back and like he kept asking for more money, and that's I just wrote down Gene deserved to get paid, that's for sure, because obviously he wasn't syndication back in the 60s or whatever. There's all those horror stories about name any popular show from the 60s and nobody got paid the way they were supposed to. So I'm glad
he did have the merchandise rights.
He did have that. So I thought that was cool.
The lawyer Leonard Malish, they were talked about as bad cop to Gene's good cop. I mean, nobody seemed to like him. He just seems like a terrible piece of crap human being that like hung on the Gene's coattails and was trying to get rich off of it.
Yeah, and I'm curious if anything he ever wrote got in.
I can't imagine much. But
I did want, and I know this again it's a 59-minute documentary, but it's like lots of times they'd mention a story about this show, blah blah blah, but they wouldn't mention the episode. And it was like, oh, I want more specifics. So I can get, but
you should read
a couple.
If you want more specifics, you need to read the 50-year mission. I'm just looking for it on my bookshelf right now, and there it is. The 50-year mission. It's a 2-volume, the first 25 years and the second 25 years. But this came out right about the time we were starting this podcast. And these are both like 600-page books, but it's oral history. So it's everybody talking about it, which makes it read a little quicker because you get quotes a lot. But Susan Sackett, I just was on that page I opened to. Herb Solo, David Gerald, Dorothy Fontana, Harlan Ellison, they're all in here, plus all the casts. Yeah. And it's a really comprehensive look. Ed Gross and Mark Altman wrote those, and they're very, very good reads. So when Next Gen started, they brought in the old crew. We mentioned Bob Justman, David Gerald, who famously wrote Trouble with Tribbles, DC Fontana, Eddie Milkis. I mean, I read enough of Shatner's books like Memories and Movie Memories and stuff that I was familiar with all these people. But, of course, only 2 of them were still alive to defend themselves. I mean, I definitely have mixed feelings about DC Fontana, always have, but she certainly seemed to think she was in the right and they were all in the wrong, and I don't completely agree with that.
She wrote some, I guess we talked about it, but she wrote some good scripts. She wrote some not so good scripts, and I think there were some other scripts that were in the middle that she wrote
the good animated series episode.
She did, Yesteryear.
Yesteryear,
yeah. And then I think there's some of the original series that got fiddled with more than they should have, that I think would have been better. I think she definitely had some good ones, but then she had some that were just terrible. So
I mean, if we're looking back at, I was looking back at her list of credits, and she wrote Charlie X, one of my least favorite. Tomorrow is Yesterday, terrible episode. This Side of Paradise, that one's decent.
Okay.
Cat's Paw, Journey to Babel, we loved. Friday's Child, By Any Other Name, The Ultimate Computer.
Okay.
The Enterprise Incident.
Okay.
That Which Survives and The Way to Eden, she adapted.
Yeah, so it was kind of she's like a bell curve.
Yeah, and then for really good, animated, she wrote... Yeah, she just wrote Yesteryear for animated. She was a story editor. If we look at her Next Gen credits, she wrote Encounter at Farpoint with Gene, as you know.
Right. Yeah.
We'll talk about that episode by itself in a second. She also wrote The Naked Now, which she took her name off and wrote under a pseudonym.
Oh, yeah.
Interestingly, Lonely Among Us, Too Short a Season, and Heart of Glory. Honestly, Heart of Glory is the only one of those I really thought was pretty good. So, I think she gets more misses than hits, honestly. But that's me. She still deserves credit. She was there at the beginning. She helped develop stuff. Yeah. She contributed a lot of good ideas that were wound into the fabric of the franchise. Just her episodes weren't always great. I think she might have been a more of an ideas person too, like Gene.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting. They were talking about they wanted Next Gen to launch a 4th television network because Fox hadn't launched yet. And I always remember watching Next Gen on Fox, so I guess it hadn't occurred to me that they had solidified that 4th network.
I was trying to go back and remember too, and I think there was a Cleveland station that I think was becoming Fox that I watched on, and there was the Dayton.
Well, this is funny too because Star Trek Phase 2 was supposed to launch the Paramount television station. The Next Gen was supposed to launch Fox, basically, and then Voyager did launch UPN, which replaced the CW, and UPN didn't last. I mean, it replaced the WB, and then UPN was itself replaced by the CW. It didn't last, but they eventually had a Star Trek show launch a network, and Voyager was very successful for UPN, so it worked out. Discovery has been pretty successful in helping build Paramount Plus before that CBS All Access. So.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people are like, I'm not going to pay to get on there, but a lot of people have. So, and there's other things on there, but you're right. It is a linchpin, if you will.
It was interesting hearing about the budget stuff and how they were going to do 26 episodes and then cut it to 13, but they couldn't make it work with 13 because you have to, I get that. You have to monetize out the basic sets over the run of the first season instead of eating them all in the pilot because it's too expensive. So that all made sense to me, but that does get in the weeds a little bit with the financial end of things. the argument for 1 hour versus a 2-hour pilot and Gene arguing against it. I guess back then it was still rare to do a double episode. Now that's the standard for a lot.
Yeah.
I love the 2-hour pilot. I mean, DS9 and Voyager and will do 2-hour pilots as well. I'm pretty sure Enterprise does. Discovery did. So that 2-hour pilots become tradition.
I think when you have that much to put in there, and in the era of streaming, 2 hours is just 2 episodes more or less. I mean, either way, it's 2 episodes, I guess. But
I guess with the original series, you're just dropped into here's the characters, here's the story.
Yeah.
But now with each spinoff, you have to not only introduce the characters and tell a story, but you have to tie it to the franchise as a whole. And that gives you more work to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
DC talked about how she wrote The Mystery of Farpoint Station, which was bizarre and hard to follow. And Gene added Q in, which is what most people love about that episode, but she complains he ruined it. I did really crack up the John Pike saying, to this day, I still don't know what the hell the episode's about. Because I do feel like I know, but I feel like it's a little obtuse. It's a little hard to get into.
And I thought I guess we've talked about it on some level, but Q being Roddenberry's version of God or whatever. And
Roddenberry always wanted to write about gods.
Yeah, that's what I thought about too. So that was very interesting. They came up with the Borg and the holodeck and Q. Those are very important. I just wrote down, well, they went 1 for 3. Although I will say I'm coming around on Q, so maybe 1.5 for 3. The Borg I love. The holodeck, we know how I feel about that.
Well, Maurice Hurley basically took credit for inventing the Borg.
That was Hurley. Yeah.
So that was a good lasting contribution because we're still doing Borg stories in New Star Trek.
Yeah, and I think the holodeck, for all I bag on it, obviously it is an interesting, whether it's used as a device or just a detour departure in certain episodes, it's definitely interesting.
I feel like Next Gen had a mixed track record with the holodeck. And they weren't really totally sure how to use it. They introduced it in the animated series, obviously, but they're still figuring it out Next Gen. DS9 uses it selectively and well, in my opinion. Voyager uses it a lot, but Voyager is so far away from everything. Their crew, that's the only recreation their crew has. And I feel like Voyager does it well, but it's definitely like when you have nothing else. And they use it to basically get into the psychological blowing off steam of the characters, which is appreciated. So DS9 just does it for like some fun little, like, let's go back to the lounge singing Vegas in the 50s or whatever. And I'm like, I'm all for that. I'm on board.
We've talked about how it's, just another version of whether it's VR or role-playing games or, online worlds with avatars and all that kind of stuff. So visionary in some ways, envisioning that in the future. Although I guess role-playing games and fantasy games were already kind of around by then, but not on that level. So
no, I still am waiting for the holodeck. I want a holodeck right now. The whole story of casting Patrick Stewart and how Gene was against him, but then Gene was like, "No, we have to cast him. Hair doesn't matter." Blah blah blah. I mean, I guess that's just so classic Gene, right? The dichotomy.
Yeah, and
can you imagine anybody else really in that role now? I mean, Patrick Stewart's so iconic.
No, and I don't know if there's a halfway between Kirk and Picard. I mean, obviously there is. Obviously, Kirk could speechify, and Picard can get into action too. But they're obviously, I wouldn't want them to be the same character.
They're two sides of the same coin, though. Everybody talks about the differences, but it's funny. You think of Kirk as the bad boy, and his backstory is he was the nerd that followed all the rules. Right. And you think of Picard as the uptight diplomat, regulation ambassador, but he was the bad boy in his youth. And it's funny how they both grew into each other's personalities. And so I really see the parallels between them. I think they're a lot more similar than most people give them credit for.
They talk about in this episode, and this may be the actual definer, is that, Roddenberry wanted to be Kirk, the womanizer, which apparently he was. Whereas Picard,
but he became Picard.
yeah. But
we'll get our chance to see Picard and Kirk interact. I really wish it was better and more, but we are going to, in the not too distant future, get to the film where they're both in it together and we get to see them interact. And I'm glad we have that moment, as mixed as I feel about how it was executed.
Yeah. I look forward to it.
They just glazed over real quick how Stewart did not get along with the rest of the cast at first, and then he eventually came around.
Yeah, I thought that was entertaining.
One of my favorite parts of this documentary was anytime Jonathan Frakes and Bill Shatner were talking. Because they clearly, Frakes loves him and is amused by him and enjoys his company.
Yeah, I could have done a whole hour just those two guys. I wrote down Bill and Jonathan. That's it. I would just love to. And maybe there's more to that conversation, but yeah, I mean, lying somewhere, but
that is a relationship I don't know anything else about besides what was right there. Yeah. And I want to see more.
Yeah.
I wish they did a project together. I want to see it. They talked about Gene having the mini strokes and not providing any leadership. I mean, that's, yeah. And the way that Gene solidified into certain rules, like the characters can't have conflict in Next Gen. The original series, they have conflict all the time. So
yeah.
I appreciate that the rest of the producers, when they came in and took over, those new guys at the end were like, yeah, we don't have to follow that. We can just, the spirit of that, but let's do the whole, we're still true to the original. It's fine. 30 writers and staff left the first season. Is that comparable to like the Trump White House in any given year?
Yeah.
Huge exodus.
Yeah.
The story about the new writer who Gene praised and then the next day they fired him.
That was terrible.
I know.
I mean, I know that's
feel bad for him. And that person was Aaron Sorkin. Now, I hope whoever it was went on to great things.
Me too.
Maurice said he'd do the show if Gene left, and then Gene left. I don't know. I mean, I loved Maurice for the most part here.
Yeah.
The fact that he said that to Gene cracks me up and seems totally in line with who he presented as himself. Yep. But the fact that Gene relented, I feel like has to tell you how worn out Gene was at the end.
Yeah.
But also, that was a wise decision. He should have just given it over and left.
And maybe it was one of those things where he's like, I wish somebody else would take over here. He's like, I'll do it. Okay. All right, bye. But
well, the few episodes they talked about was conspiracy and how they thought Maurice thought it broke Gene's rules. I liked conspiracy. I wish they'd followed up on that more.
Yeah. We talked about that's the one with the bugs, right?
Yeah. That would have been interesting to see followed up on.
Yeah, I wish there'd been more of that. That's where we early on got deepest into wanting a serial. Yeah. Because that was one that connected a couple of different episodes, but not
two. Yeah. Well, then Hurley's plan was to make the Borg a whole season 2 arc, which the writer's strike screwed up. They got the best of both worlds at the end of season 3, which I feel like Hurley's Borg arc probably would have been a little different. I mean, it would have been because he presented what it was. But I appreciate that we did get Borg arcs as things go on, and they're still getting Borg arcs today coming off of this original Borg story. But yeah, I would have really liked to see that second season. We mentioned that the second season was a little shorter because of the writer's strike. Man, writer's strikes screw up television shows. Thank goodness they didn't get canceled. I remember the last big writer's strike about 10 years ago. There were a number of shows that I loved that were victims of it. I really wanted to hear even more about Denise Crosby being pushed out.
I was confused. Who did she play?
The story about her saying, just build me legs to stand behind them. I felt so bad for her. Yeah. I'm like, she only did like 16 episodes. So how could you have, and there were a couple of Yar focused ones. So I'm like, how bored could you have gotten that quickly? But I guess, I mean, it takes a week, 10 days to film an episode. So I guess then you're talking quite a few months with not a lot to do.
Yeah.
The Diana Mulder, I feel like if the whole cast had been Patrick Stewart in season 1, she would have been fine. But by the time she got there, they'd already softened up Patrick Stewart, and they're like, yeah, no, we're not doing it again with somebody else. And she didn't want to be softened up. So her loss, because they all kept saying they never found Pulaski. I thought they found her, and I liked her.
I think she could have worked. Felt like they sold her on one thing, and then she came in, it was another. But yeah.
I liked your character, which isn't to say I'm not glad Crusher didn't return. I am glad Crusher returned, but I liked Pulaski too. I feel like she gets the short shift as a character a lot of times. I proudly have a Pulaski action figure that I put with the rest of the crew. Maurice Hurley, when he was going to kill the entire cast, because they were rebelling on him. I'm like, okay, yep, it was time for him to go. And at the same time, I want to see that show. I want to see the show where they kill the whole cast 2 or 3 seasons in and they rebuild.
Yeah.
That's my alternate episode. Is I want to see the version of Next Gen where they blow up the cast after bringing a whole new cast.
My alternate episode is our retrospective on Quark, the making of Quark behind the scenes, and how much Mel Brooks and Buck Henry were involved. Or maybe it was just Buck Henry. Buck Henry was I've already forgotten.
I did not enjoy that series, but if such a documentary exists, I will watch it and review it for this podcast.
There was I was going to say a lot of talented people. There was a decent amount of talented people involved in that, who I would be interested to hear an oral history about it. But
I love Mel Brooks and Buck Henry, so I'm in. If you find a documentary, I'm in.
Oh, yeah. Fashion. Ira Bear's purple goatee. It works for him, I think. With the hat, it works, I think. And then he talked about creating Ryza, which I thought that makes sense that this guy came up with Ryza. He seems like a fun guy. There's so many people I would like to have a drink with from this thing. Shatner, Frakes. I went with Gene. Maurice Hurley. Ira Bear.
I'm going to go with Hurley, but you just made a lot of good. Ira Stephen Burr, I'm going to save to have my drink with later. He is so instrumental in DS9. I think you're really going to, like I said, I think you're going to dig DS9.
And I like Ronald D. Moore a lot. Some of that's because he did For All Man. He's still doing For All Mankind. So
and he did the new Battlestar Galactica and Outlander and
I don't know if he'd be a fun guy to have a drink with, but I would learn a lot, I think. So
I hear he's pretty fun, but he's also serious. He and Ira Stephen Burr did quite a great job on DS9, let me tell you. And Ira Stephen Burr, wanting to bring the sex back into Star Trek. DS9 is a lot more sex than Next Gen. For sure.
I totally see that.
They visit Ryza on more than one occasion.
Okay.
So blue or purple, it's been blue, it's been purple, but that beard's been that color for a long time.
Yeah.
That is not a recent thing for him.
Good on him. Look good.
I love it. The story about John Pike calling Patrick Stewart's bluff on quitting, the story about Patrick Stewart walking off with Good Morning America. Those aren't necessarily important, but I appreciated the little stories.
I did too. I
was all for that. And Pike chewing out Patrick Stewart for the Good Morning America, but then saying, but I understand.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that happened. Yeah. But I think Patrick Stewart was selectively remembering the other story.
Mm-hmm. I think so too.
They refocused on characters when the new guys showed up, which is what Star Trek becomes. I feel like we've seen that the episodes of Next Gen that really focus on a character are much better than the ones that are just like, here's a mission.
Yeah.
And they just happen to be in it.
Because we've had the ones where we talk about the Crusher episodes or Troy episodes that aren't as good. And I feel like I'm selectively picking them out, the women out, but that's not, everyone's had a bad, Geordie's had some terrible episodes. Yeah. I think some of the issues you're right is because in those episodes, it's like, this is the person that's going to solve this crisis this week, but it's not really about the character. It's really about the crisis.
Yes.
And they just kind of shoehorn them in there.
And instead, the ones where you're into how Worf relates to Klingon culture, or how Data relates to his family, or how Picard deals with the pressures of command, like those are good episodes. Yeah. We want to see more of that.
Yeah.
Or the Barclay one that's coming up. We'll talk about that early in the season. Best of Both Worlds, they mentioned that's when Star Trek became the next generation. And I do feel like there's a lot of people in my generation that for them they've never seen the original series, and for them Star Trek is the next generation. Yep. Best of Both Worlds, I think we all agree was we had our plot flaws, our gripes about the second half, but as a two-parter for what it did for the franchise, I think it was very successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that first part was fantastic. I mean, all the
my god,
it's I'll say Wrath of Khan, but and I'm sure I referenced that in Balance of Terror in that episode, our episode about on those episodes. But yeah, it's that first episode is just so much packed in. I'm like, this is all in 48 minutes, and there's more to come. But,
well, and I will say, just like Wrath of Khan was a sequel to Space Seed, the second Next Gen movie, First Contact, is pretty much a sequel to Best of Both Worlds.
Oh, okay.
And so they took that really great concept and expanded into movie, and it is the best Next Gen movie. It's really good film. Cool. It's almost as good as Wrath of Khan. It's a solid film. So I think you'll see that as well. I think you'll really enjoy that one.
Cool.
Berman sees power. Gene was failing and obsessed with his legacy. I mean, you feel bad, but at the same time, you understand. I feel like a lot of old men get there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gene died, and they all respect him. It's very clear that everybody they're interviewing respects Gene Roddenberry, which is telling because a lot of them said he did some nasty things, but it comes across that they all respect him. And I feel like, I think we've said this before, that Star Trek succeeds in spite of Gene Roddenberry.
Yes, we have.
But it also succeeds because of him. Like, he did lay the foundation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great way to sum this up, too, is while this story, we focused on Gene at the beginning and the end, and in the middle, we had a lot of other stories. But, yeah, in the end, it is about Gene, and it is about how he was a great man with great flaws.
And there is something to be said about his positive vision of the future, because I think they mentioned it in there, and I think I saw this somewhere else, but so much of the future, and I enjoy those as well, the dystopian future, the Mad Maxes and everything else. But I thought about it. It's like, I know we're living in a dystopia now all of a sudden, but I thought about that. I was like, yeah, I totally bought into that. It was like, and I not only did I buy into it, I still believe it, that we will get to that. We're in a rough patch right now, for sure, on planet Earth. But
we haven't hit World War III yet. Remember, Star Trek goes through World War III.
That's right. We have not. But I think, I think that was a big part of it. He put that DNA in my head, and I think as far as vision goes, I think there is, because Star Wars is not a positive. There is nothing positive. The message of Star Wars is everyone dies, and everyone is not good at what they do.
I saw a great meme this past week where it was Obi-Wan giving Luke the lightsaber in the original movie, like, this belonged to your father, and said what was deleted from the scene was, this belonged to your father. He used it to murder a whole bunch of children. And then last time I saw him, I cut him down and left him for dead next to a lava pit.
Yeah, and the whole thing is just, and maybe it is. It started off as a kind of a Vietnam. There's an anti-establishment Vietnam. To George Lucas, the United States in the mid '70s was the empire, and this is the rebels were whatever, the liberals were.
How little did he know?
Yeah. So
Trump Vader hadn't even come on the scene yet.
That's right.
That's an insult to Darth Vader. He was way more intelligent and emotionally mature than Donald Trump.
And I guess to that extent, back then, or at least I guess still, I relate to that part of Lucas being like, let's root for the little guy, that kind of thing. That's a different message from Star Trek, which is, the big guy can be, which is, again, that's a very liberal, like, government can be good kind of a thing, or we can all get together and be good in this. So, yeah.
Well, and what I like about Star Trek Picard, and what we'll get into later, is the positive and negatives of that overarching infrastructure. Yeah. Like, the United Federation of Planets has built something great, but it can still fall privy to politics, and it can still have its issues. And we see that in Star Trek Picard. We see that in Star Trek Discovery. So I appreciate that even in this utopian future, it's superficially utopia, but there's still problems because there are still people, and people are still people, no matter what Gene's utopian vision was. Yeah. I'd still rather live in the Star Trek future than our current reality.
Yes, me too.
We mentioned who we were going to have a drink with. We mentioned our alternate episodes. Who was your annoyance in this special?
It was Gene.
That's fair.
Yeah.
We didn't get to hear from Gene himself, so I have a hard time picking him.
Sure.
I'm going to pick DC Fontana because while she was probably right to be frustrated that they pushed her out, at the same time, I always felt like every time I see her talk, she talks as if she's more important than she is, and it bothers me. And same thing for, like, Gene Roddenberry too. Like, I'm not saying that it's not a sexist thing. It's David Gerrold just seems so much more accepting of, I did a job. They don't want me to do the job.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not happy about it, but I'm gone. And where she's like, they made a mistake. They were not. And I'm like, this was decades ago, and I'm sorry, but yeah.
I agree. I had just in the back of my head, I was running through the Rolodex of, well, what episodes did you write? And again, in that creative process, whatever. But I wasn't as annoyed as you, but I felt a similar, like, well, were you? Is it? Did we?
Yeah, and if David Gerrold had come out saying that, he wrote the trope. Well, Trouble with Tribbles is the big one. He did a rewrite on iMud, and he wrote the Cloudminders, neither of which I was that into. Yeah. I guess he wasn't that. I was gonna say he had more justification, but maybe not.
I'm a bigger Cloudminders fan than you guys. I know that, but I can't say that was a great episode, but I liked it.
He wrote More Tribbles, More Troubles, which was but he wrote Bem, which I liked Bem.
I did too. That's one of the weirder. Limited run. It was one of the weirder ones.
Did you like this documentary?
I did. I liked it. Like I said, I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to the point that I was like, you know what? I could use maybe not another 59 minutes, but I mean, I realized the story they were telling was within those 2 hours. Yeah, I think I would have, like I said, I would have, now that I've watched all these and I kind of know, I mean, part of me was like, if they named a lot of the episodes, I'd been like, oh, which one was that? But I would have still liked to got into even more little specifics or a week on the set, but I know, that's tough. So yeah, I did. And I thought Shatner did a great job. I don't know who the editor was. I'm sure they were great too, but I thought he obviously had a vision and where he wanted to go with it. I enjoyed it a lot. I was surprised, but I did.
Film editing by Decibel Desco?
All right.
No idea.
Good on them.
No idea. I mean, they had a whole editorial department as well. Next week we're off because, we're still on our break. This is a hiatus. But when we come back after this, we will be starting TNG Season 6.
Wow.
Times Arrow Part 2. Can't believe we're down to the final 2 seasons of Next Gen. Times Arrow Part 2. Captain Picard and crew follow Data back to the late 1800s to get him back, only to find the suspected alien visitors killing people at the time.
Succinct. Correct.
Until then, live long.
Like the great bird of the galaxy, and prosper.
He didn't live that long.
Wasn't he 73? Was he?
Yeah, that's not that old.
I guess it's not that long now.
No.
I mean, I'll take 73. But
I'm
like
hoping for a little more.
Yeah.
It's All Been Done presents
Who's Got the Time?